Hi everyone. This is English 362 studies in Victorian literature. And we're going to be focusing on one novel, The Great Middlemarch by George Eliot. Um, why devote a whole class to one novel? Well, first of all, it's so long, it's kind of hard to do anything else. I mean, I'm squeezing a lot of reading in this class. Um, as it is. Um, but this is going to be the kind of central, unique focus. Um, and what warrants devoting a whole class to one novel? It's an imaginary story. Um, it was written in the late 1860s, but it is set in the late 1820s, around 1830. The subtitle is A Study of Provincial Life. So that already gives you an idea why it might be worthy of a whole, class on its own. It's not just a story, but it's a study of life, of provincial life. Um, it's a study of a kind of life. It's trying to, or the title suggests that it's saying something more generalizable, like a scientific study, um, than just a made up story. Um, and George Eliot, and it also this historical setting, um, being set. George Eliot was maybe in her teens at the time that the novel's set in. Um, so that's kind of interesting too. She's describing the world that she grew up in. Um, and it's also, in a way, the world that um, our form of society grew out of. A big couple sort of subtle but really crucial contextual factors are the development of the radio, the railroad, and the uh, debate on the first reform bill, expanding the French franchise in uh, Britain, and making a kind of crucial transition from a hierarchical, basically aristocratic form of society, which a very exclusive elite are entitled to vote, to at least an in principle broad scale mass democracy, like we have now. So it's a transition. It's about provincial life, but it's actually, in a way, about provincial death. Like it's about the end of a kind of uh, the world that George Eliot herself grew up in. It's like an adult writing about their adolescence, or a middle-aged person writing about their adolescence. Um, so she's unearthing in an archaeological way um, the preconditions of her world and her readers' world in the late 19th century. Um, and the, and more than that, she's um, noticing sort of an accelerated changeability of history, that history speeds up with modernity. I mean, um, that changes start coming quicker and quicker. Um, that compared to the provincial life of the sort of feudal form of life of um, you know basically farmers working land that's owned by aristocrats. That's centuries old, millennia old, um, and this she's documenting its final um, chapter, and thereby exposing also a um, historical background to her own present, and reminding, modernity from, whether you're talking about the modernity of George Eliot's time of 1860s, or now. Um, Modernity is always about amnesia in a way, just sort of forgetting the past, this focus on the now and moving forward, this obsession with the new, um, makes us, tend to feel like the past is obsolete. That we've surpassed it, and that new is always better. Um, so that's something that George Eliot is, a function for the novel, the historical realist novel that George Eliot is kind of pioneering here, um, telling history um, on this fine-grained level of individual experience. So using fiction to tell history not in terms of facts and dates, which are objectively correct, but in a way too abstract to ever be real. It's sort of like, the average family has 1.5 kids. Like, that's true on some level, but on some other level, it's totally, it's not actually manifest in the world anywhere. So that's kind of what novels are about, is like, or novels as George Eliot is pioneering, um, is this history as it's actually lived by in the idiosyncratic details of particular lives, um, that can't be averaged out in the way official historical statistics and so on um, tell us a kind of objective summary, generalized summary, but doesn't give us the texture, the detail of that fine-grained detail of uh, life as it's actually lived. So that's a cool thing to notice about um, George Eliot. This theme of um, mediation, Middlemarch, marching through the middle, um, uh, being in between, um, is incessant. And it's going to be in this class. We're going to continuously be talking about the way in which this novel bridges um, categories and ideas that we tend to think of as contradictory. So here, science um, and scientific generalization, the study of provincial life on the one hand, and on the other hand, the idiosyncratic details of very particular lives that can't be generalized, but this is it's a study of the actual texture of what being a person is actually like in this context. Um, and another key, so that's an idea of realism that Eliot develops in her essays that I've asked you to look at on Ruskin and the natural history of German life, um, where she describes her distinctive idea of realism. And we tend to think realism is pretty simple. It's like that's what you get in the newspaper. Um, but these days, I think we're realizing that realism, what counts as real, what counts as a fact, can be pretty debatable. And although even if you might hold to be committed to an idea of scientific objectivity, um, that is, again, that leaves out a lot of experience. Um, On the one hand, because scientific objectivity, what's kind of true for everybody, or what can be defined from this kind of clinical, objective, scientific viewpoint has been described as the view from nowhere. What's objectively true, it relies on removing the subjective perspective that we're all always involved in. Um, the, the subjective perspective through which actual life is always um, experienced. So again, it's like subjectivity does give us a truth, but it's so generalizable. It's so true in a way that it doesn't apply to any actual particular life. Um, so again, that's what art. That's for all the ambiguity of art, it tries to speak to us on the level of give us a truth that applies to the real context of real lives. Um, so we have a lot to learn from George Eliot, I think, because we're living in a weird time ourselves, where what counts as real is confused, and we're struggling to find a common language, um, uh, with which to represent experience. That's what it's a real central concern of George Eliot's. So, when you look at the reviews of Ruskin and Real, the um, Natural History of German Life, um, it's interesting how she talks about realism. So, the truth of infinite value that Ruskin teaches is realism. Doctrine that all truth and beauty are to be attained by a humble and faithful study of nature. That faithful is not accidental. She's not talking only about the faith to objectivity, a scientist's faith to objectivity, but she's also talking about what kind of faith that we associate with religion. Um, and not substituting vague forms bred by imagination on the myths of feeling in place of definite substantial reality. So she's saying I want to be definite, specific, get again to that like granular detail of actual experience, totally idiosyncratic. The messy details of life are really crucial for Eliot's art, and the reality that she wants to represent. She doesn't want it to uh, diluted in vague, imaginary generalities. Um, but then listen to what she says, very next sentence. The thorough acceptance of this doctrine of realism would remold your life. It will transform you, will kind of resurrect, give you a rebirth in a way that it is, again, not incidentally associated with Christianity. Um, uh, it's so she continues. It's not enough simply to teach the truth. Again, the truth, just simple truth, is in its simplicity or in its generality, can actually be a lie. Uh, Instead, we want truth to be so taught as to compel men's attention and sympathy. So again, here you're getting a sense of the role of a kind of Christian faith. It has to move you, change you to really be true. Um, so uh, it's again what she's calling realism is it, something quite different from what we might understand just in terms of objectivity. Um, And as she continues, you understand how crucial art is to the teaching of this truth. Um, she compares it to music. Very correct singing of very fine music will avail little without a voice, the individual voice, embodied, um, performative. Do you hear a voice only? It has to be concrete in a particular um, conversation. That's where a voice happens. Um, uh, so, correct singing, fine music avail little without a voice that can thrill the audience and take possession of their souls. Um, uh, so, um, interesting, again, mediation of a lot of terms that we might think of as contradictory. It's sort of like, it's an oracular experience, a religious conversion of revelation that she's talking about in terms of realism. Uh, and the point is with George Eliot is that she is her fidelity to her scientific, what we would consider academic scholarly fidelity to, the history, objective sociology, objective psychology, biology, are all um, uh, impeccable. So she brings to bear all the intelligence of a scientific, all the acuity of observation, if she were just doing objective sociology or history or whatnot. And she's, one of the key metaphors in Middlemarch is the microscope, like scientific observation, and she takes that seriously and does not want to fail by that standard of objectivity. But at the same time, she wants it to sing. She wants to bring a voice to that, a soul moving, transformative, transfiguring uh, voice, artistic, creative voice to that level of reality. It's amazing. And really inspiring. So I'm so excited to be spending this term with this book. Just finally, notice this amazing sculpture by Bernini, The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. Christian saint. Oh shoot. Uh, that we'll read a little bit of her autobiography. But she is the protagonist in Middlemarch is modeled on her in the prelude. Uh, she's called a sort of anonymous Saint Teresa, a foundress of nothing. But this figure, as you'll read, she's famous for her passionate writing about religious experience, being this visitation by angels. She describes in very erotic terms being penetrated by angels. So this is a very famous icon of kind of penetration of different discourses, religion, dogma, and sensuality, as is Anthony and Cleopatra. So I'm going to turn to that next.